The crystal glass shattered against the marble floor of the five-star restaurant, and 19-year-old Vivian Whitmore didn't even flinch as every head turned toward her. She simply crossed her arms over her designer white silk dress, her perfectly manicured fingers trembling not with embarrassment, but with rage, while her father Marcus sat across from her with his head in his hands, wondering where he had lost his daughter, the little girl who once had the kindest heart he'd ever known. "I don't care what you say, Daddy. I'm not going to that stupid charity event, and you can't make me." Vivian's voice echoed through the elegant dining room of La Belle Maison, the most exclusive restaurant in the city, where chandeliers dripped with golden light and the scent of expensive perfume mingled with truffle risotto. But all Vivian could feel was the hollow ache inside her chest that she filled with shopping sprees, exotic vacations, and the cruel satisfaction of watching others scramble to please her. Marcus Whitmore, a self-made millionaire who had built his empire from nothing, looked at his daughter with eyes full of sorrow. She had his late wife's golden hair and delicate features. But somewhere along the way, after her mother died when Vivian was just 12, the sweet girl who used to bake cookies for the staff and read stories to children at the hospital had transformed into someone he barely recognized. "Vivian, please," Marcus said quietly, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "Your mother would have wanted," but she cut him off sharply. "Don't you dare talk about her. You have no idea what she would have wanted because you were never there. Always at work, always too busy building your precious empire while I was alone." The words hung in the air like poison, and Marcus felt each one pierce his heart because he knew there was truth in them. He had thrown himself into work after losing his beloved Catherine, using business deals and board meetings to numb the pain, not realizing his daughter needed him more than ever. A gentle voice broke through the tension, soft as morning rain. "Excuse me, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I noticed the broken glass. Let me clean that up for you. And can I bring you both some water, or perhaps some chamomile tea? Sometimes a warm cup can settle even the stormiest feelings." Grace Mitchell, a 45-year-old waitress with kind brown eyes and hands worn from decades of hard work, stood beside their table, holding a small tray, her burgundy uniform simple but immaculate, her presence somehow calming despite the chaos. Vivian turned her cold gaze on Grace, looking her up and down with barely concealed disdain. "We don't need anything from you, and maybe if this restaurant hired competent staff instead of—" But Marcus quickly interrupted. "Vivian, that's enough. Apologize right now," his voice firm in a way it rarely was with his daughter. Grace simply smiled, a smile that held no judgment, no anger, only a deep well of compassion that Vivian couldn't understand. "It's quite all right, sir. No apology needed. We all have difficult days, and sometimes our hearts carry burdens too heavy for words." There was something in the way Grace looked at Vivian, something that made the young woman feel suddenly exposed, as if this stranger in a waitress uniform could see past the designer clothes and expensive jewelry into the lonely, frightened girl underneath. Grace knelt down carefully, her knees protesting slightly, as they always did after long shifts, and began collecting the shards of broken crystal, each piece glinting in the chandelier light like fallen stars. And as she worked, she hummed a melody so soft and sweet that Vivian felt an unexpected tightness in her throat. "That song," Vivian whispered, her voice suddenly small. "Where do you know that song from?" Grace looked up, surprise flickering across her face. "Oh, it's just an old lullaby. My grandmother taught it to me, and I used to sing it to my own children when they were small. Do you recognize it?" Vivian's hands had begun to tremble for a different reason now, because she did recognize it. It was the song her mother used to hum while braiding her hair before bedtime, the song that meant safety and love, and everything good in the world before it all fell apart. The restaurant seemed to fade away as Vivian was pulled into a memory. She was 7 years old, sitting in front of her mother's vanity, while gentle hands worked through her tangled hair, and Catherine was humming that exact melody, her voice like honey and sunshine, and young Vivian had asked, "Mama, will you always be here?" And her mother had kissed the top of her head and said, "My darling girl, even if you can't see me, I'll always be with you, in every act of kindness you share with the world." Marcus noticed his daughter's face had gone pale, and he reached across the table. "Vivian, are you all right?" Grace stood up slowly, the broken glass carefully gathered on her tray, and she studied Vivian with those perceptive eyes. Sometimes the things we've lost find ways back to us, in the smallest moments. Through the most unexpected people. Your daughter looks like she could use some fresh air, perhaps the garden terrace. Marcus nodded gratefully and helped Vivian to her feet, and though she usually shrugged off any assistance, this time she let her father guide her through the restaurant to the outdoor terrace, where night jasmine bloomed and fairy lights twinkled like captured fireflies. They sat on an ornate bench overlooking the city lights, and for a long moment, neither spoke, until Vivian's voice emerged barely above a whisper. "I miss her, Daddy. Every single day I miss her so much. It feels like I can't breathe. And being mean to people, pushing everyone away, it's easier than letting anyone close enough to hurt me again." Marcus felt tears burning in his eyes as he pulled his daughter into his arms for the first time in years. Really held her, the way he should have been doing all along. "I miss her too, sweetheart. And I'm so sorry. Sorry I wasn't there for you. I'm sorry I let my own grief blind me to yours. I'm sorry I tried to replace her love with material things instead of giving you what you really needed." They cried together on that terrace, father and daughter finally sharing the grief they had each carried alone for 7 years. And when Grace appeared quietly with a tray of chamomile tea and small lavender cookies, she didn't intrude, just set it down gently on the nearby table and turned to leave. "Wait," Vivian called out, her voice raw but sincere. "Please wait time. Sorry. I'm so sorry for how I spoke to you. You didn't deserve that. Nobody deserves that. And I've been horrible to so many people." Grace turned back with that same gentle smile. "Apology accepted, dear. And I can see you're carrying more than anyone so young should have to carry. Your mother must have been a very special woman." Something clicked in Vivian's mind. "How did you know we were talking about my mother?" Grace hesitated, glancing at Marcus with a question in her eyes, and he nodded slowly, giving permission for something Vivian didn't yet understand. Grace sat down carefully on the edge of a nearby chair, folding her hands in her lap. "Because I knew her. Knew Catherine Whitmore. We were roommates in college before life took us on very different paths. She married a brilliant man and built a beautiful life, and I faced some hardships that led me here, but we kept in touch. Exchanged letters and occasional phone calls." Vivian's eyes widened in disbelief. "You knew my mother? But how? Why didn't anyone tell me? Why are you working here as a—" She stopped herself, hearing how the words sounded. "As a waitress." Grace finished kindly. "Because honest work is nothing to be ashamed of. Sweetheart, after my husband passed away when my children were young, I did what I had to do to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. And your mother, beautiful soul that she was, she helped me sometimes, anonymously sending money for school supplies, winter coats, things like that. And when she got sick, she made me promise something." The terrace had gone very quiet, except for the gentle splash of the fountain and the distant sound of city traffic. And Vivian leaned forward, desperate to hear every word about the mother she'd lost. "She made me promise that if I ever saw you struggling, really struggling in your heart and soul, I would try to remind you who you really are." She knew that grief could twist people, that losing her might make you forget the kindness and love she'd taught you. And she wanted you to know that her love didn't die with her body. It lives on in every choice you make to be generous, to be compassionate, to be the light she always knew you could be. Grace reached into her uniform pocket and pulled out a faded photograph, its edges soft from years of handling, and she handed it to Vivian with careful reverence. In the photo, Two young women sat on a college dorm room floor, laughing at something beyond the frame. One was clearly Catherine, young and radiant, with the same golden hair Vivian had inherited, and the other was Grace, decades younger, but with those same kind eyes, and they had their arms around each other like sisters. Vivian traced her mother's face with one finger, tears streaming freely down her cheeks. She looked so happy, so full of life. I've spent 7 years being angry at the world for taking her away, and I became someone she wouldn't even recognize. Marcus spoke up, his voice thick with emotion. Your mother asked me to watch over Grace and her family after she passed, to make sure they were taken care of, and when Grace mentioned she was working here, I've been coming to this restaurant for months, hoping somehow you and she would meet, hoping that maybe where I had failed to reach you, her connection to your mother might succeed. Vivian looked at her father with new understanding, seeing for the first time the depth of his love and his desperate attempts to save her from herself, and she felt the walls she'd built around her heart beginning to crumble. I've been so awful, Vivian said, looking between Grace and her father, to you, to Daddy, to everyone around, Mitha, staff at home, the drivers, people at school. I don't even know if I can fix all the damage I've done. Grace reached out and took both of Vivian's hands in her own, and the warmth of that simple gesture felt like coming home. The beautiful thing about being human, dear child, is that we can always choose to start again. This very moment your mother used to say that every sunrise is God's way of telling us it's never too late for a new beginning. The three of them sat together on that terrace as the night deepened around them, and Grace shared stories of Catherine that Vivian had never heard, silly college pranks, dreams they'd whispered in the dark, the day Catherine met Marcus and came home floating on air, the phone call when Catherine cried, happy tears telling Grace she was pregnant. Each story was a gift, a piece of her mother returned to her, and Vivian felt something she hadn't felt in 7 years. Hope. What can I do? Vivian finally asked. How do I become the person my mother believed I could be? Grace smiled. You start small, one kind word, one genuine apology, one moment of putting someone else's needs before your own, and then you do it again the next day, and the day after that, until kindness becomes not something you do, but something you are. Over the following weeks, Vivian began a transformation that surprised everyone who knew her. She personally apologized to each member of the household staff, not just with words, but with changed behavior, learning their names, asking about their families, offering to help rather than demand service. She attended the charity event with her father, and instead of sulking in the corner, she spent the evening talking with the young people the charity served, really listening to their stories, and she donated her entire designer wardrobe to programs that helped women re-entering the workforce. She started volunteering at the children's hospital, where she and her mother used to read stories. And though it was painful at first to be in those halls filled with memories, she discovered that serving others was the best medicine for her wounded heart. Grace became a regular presence in their lives, joining them for Sunday dinners at the mansion, and the relationship that developed between them was something precious and unexpected, not quite mother and daughter, but not simply friends either, something deeper and more spiritual, a living bridge to the woman they both loved and missed. One evening, 6 months after that fateful night at the restaurant, Vivian found Grace in the mansion's garden, tending to the rose bushes that had been Catherine's pride and joy, and she sat down beside her on the grass, not caring that her jeans were getting dirty. Grace, can I ask you something? Vivian said softly. Why did you keep working as a waitress even after Daddy offered to help you, offered you a position at his company with better pay? Grace continued, pruning a yellow rose, her movements careful and practiced. Because I learned a long time ago that my worth isn't defined by my job title or my bank account, but by the love I give and the lives I touch. I've raised two beautiful children who are kind and hardworking. I've served thousands of people with dignity and care, and I've lived according to my values. And that, my dear, is true wealth. Vivian nodded, understanding in a way she couldn't have months before. I'm starting college in the fall, and I've been thinking, I want to study social work, maybe non-profit management. I want to help people the way you and my mother did. Grace's eyes filled with proud tears as she cupped Vivian's face gently. Your mother is smiling down on you, sweetheart. I know she is. You've found your way back to yourself. The final scene came on what would have been Catherine's 50th birthday, and Vivian organized a memorial celebration at the Children's Hospital. Not a sad affair, but a joyful one, filled with music and laughter and acts of service in Catherine's name. Marcus stood with his arm around his daughter, watching as Grace read stories to a group of sick children, her voice warm and animated, and he whispered, "Thank you for coming back to me. Vivian, I have my daughter back." Vivian leaned her head on her father's shoulder. "And I have my dad back. We lost our way for a while, but Mom sent us a guide, didn't she?" As the sun set through the hospital windows, painting everything in shades of gold and amber, Vivian felt her mother's presence more strongly than she had in years, not in grief or loss, but in love and purpose. And she understood finally what Catherine had meant all those years ago. Even when we can't see the ones we've lost, they remain with us, woven into every act of kindness we choose, every moment we open our hearts despite the risk of pain, every time we allow love to transform us from who we've become back into who we were always meant to be.